Welcome back to the Blazor Server In-Depth course. In this lesson, we're going to be setting up our SQL database. Okay, and there's a few different ways you can do this. I'm going to go about the way that I think is probably best for designing and building a database, which is to use the SQL Server database tools. But you could use SQL Server Management Studio and do the same thing and build your database that way. I just find it's a little easier to use SSDT. So we're going to go that route. Now you may ask, why aren't you using Entity Framework? And I have a video on that, I have a blog post on that, and I've kind of made my thoughts clear on this, is I'm not really a big fan of using Entity Framework here, or in most cases. And one of the reasons why is because if you're learning Blazor, it's not the time to use Entity Framework. If you are not really an expert in Entity Framework, it's really not the time to use Entity Framework. And you may ask, well, how do you become an expert in Entity Framework if you don't use it? That's a great question. And the answer is a lot of practice. A lot of practice. And it's one of those things that often people, they try to get into it too early, and it works. And that's the worst part in my mind, is that it works because it works, it looks right, and it goes to production, and then there's problems. And I've seen this over and over and over again. I've seen companies insist to me that Entity Framework will not be a problem, and then it becomes a problem for them or their customers. And that's rough because it's too late at that point. Okay, so we're going to go with building our own SQL database and talking to it using Dapper. So let's build our own database. So right-click on Solution and hit Add, New Project. And we're going to clear out this, and we're going to look for a SQL. Wait for it to type. SQL database project. There we go, SQL Server database project. And we hit next. And let's call this our sample DB for sample database. We're going to keep our database really simple because this is not about teaching you how to use databases. This is about teaching you how to set up data access. Okay. Now, the really cool thing is that in your homework, we're going to do a totally different database. And that's okay because the way we set this up, it's not dependent on SQL. So if you're thinking, man, I wish Tim would have done this data access, this will still apply. Okay? So when we build a SQL database and we talk to it, all the code except for one little bit will apply to your situation as well. So we're going to I'm going to show you how to swap this out for a different database type, an even entirely different database type, okay? This is SQL. We could do NoSQL. We could do text file. We could do an API. It doesn't really matter. It won't affect 98% of our application. It's one file that it will affect, all right? So let's build our database. I'm going to create a folder structure here. So I'll add a folder called DBO. And let's bring this up on the screen a little bit. And then inside DBO, I'm going to add a new folder. Let's call it Tables. And I'll add another new folder in DBO, and I'll call it Stored Procedures. All right. Now in Tables, we're going to have just one table. And this table is going to be called People. And the People table has an ID. It's an int, not null, primary. And we need to make this identity. Okay, which means it's going to auto-increment that ID. Very important to have that auto-incrementing ID. All right, so first name, varchar, let's leave it at 50 is fine. No, you can't have a null for your first name. Last name, same thing. And we'll have date of birth, if I can spell that right. There we go. And that'd be a date time 2. So SQL Server has date time in there, but that was not very efficient, so it came up with date time 2. They didn't just update date time because it would have caused breaking changes. And so if you're using SQL Server, use date time 2, not date time. It's much more efficient. Okay, so really simple table here. First name, last name, date of birth, that's it. Okay, that just gives us some data to put on the page. So now let's create our database. We're going to create this in our local DB. So we have this local DB over here. This is where we're going to create our database. So let's close this out. Let's publish this database. So right click and say publish. And I'm going to save this publish script. So let's first go to target database. We can hit edit. And under browse, under local, I'm going to choose local DB and hit OK. Database name is going to be data access demo DB. That corresponds to our solution name. And the publish script name is fine at sample DB. And I'm going to save this profile. So this profile is going to save right in the root of sample DB. So there it is. We can now double click on it and open it up. And in here, what we're going to do is we're going to add a connection string for our, let's call it our SQL DB. Okay? And there's our SQL database. So now whenever we ask for SQL DB, it's going to give us this SQL database. Okay, so we're going to hit save on this. So now we have that connection string ready and available for us when we need it. And we have our database set up. And now we're pretty much set up to start working with our data access. So that's it for this video. We've got our database set up. We're ready for data access. We're good to go. So now let's kind of wrap it up here, practice what we've done, make sure that you're kind of on the same page where we're at, and then move on to the next lesson. We're going to start working with actually getting data from the user and saving it into our database.